So, what happens when the rules of power just get tossed out the window? Today, we're going to break down a source text that argues there's a new ideology at play, one it calls unrestrained power. We'll look at how it's defined, where it could lead, and what the source claims the real consequences are.
All right, the source we're analyzing kicks things off with this really provocative statement from Donald Trump. It's not just about this one quote, though. It's the starting point for a much bigger idea. So, what's the thinking that gets you to a place where you'd even suggest canceling an election?
Exactly. That's the million-dollar question the source really digs into. What kind of belief system, it asks, could possibly lead someone to the conclusion that you should just abandon the whole democratic process? Okay, here's our roadmap. First, we're going to define this core ideology of power. Then we'll see how it clashes with traditional democratic norms. After that, we'll look at some real-world examples in both domestic and foreign policy. And finally, we'll unpack the source's claims about who really comes out on top. All right, let's jump into section 1. The argument here is that what we're seeing isn't just a series of random comments. The source claims there's a very consistent ideology at work here, one that's built on the idea that some people have a right to power no matter what the rules say. So according to the article, the logic goes something like this. If you believe your side has the right policy and the other side is horrible, then any election you lose must be wrong. It's not the policy that's wrong, it's the voters. And if that's your starting point, the source says, you eventually end up asking, why bother with elections at all? Okay, so if that's the core idea, how does it really measure up against the way things have usually been done? This next section is all about how this ideology, according to the source, goes head-to-head with some really long-standing ideas about what government is even for. First, the source kind of sets the baseline. It talks about something called the liberal consensus. You can think of this as a big American idea, one that both parties basically agreed on since World War II, that the government's job is to protect people and make sure everyone gets a fair shot. And wow, here is a perfect example of the break from that consensus. The source highlights this quote from tech entrepreneur Peter Thiel back in 2009. The idea that freedom and democracy might not even be compatible? That is a radical departure from that old idea of a level playing field. Okay, so we've got the theory, but what does this ideology actually look like in practice? The source focuses on two major areas where it claims reality itself is being rewritten: the story of January 6th and the state of the U.S. economy. Now, this is where it gets really stark. Just look at the two columns here. The source points to the official White House description of January 6th and says it's a total reversal of the original story. It's a narrative that transforms insurrectionists into peaceful patriots and flips the script to make the villains the people who were actually certifying the election.
And the source argues you see the exact same thing happening with the economy. On one side, you have big names like the New York Times and Moody's Analytics saying the economy at the start of 2025 was the best it had been in over 2 decades. And on the other side, President Trump describing that very same economy as a total disaster.
And just to be clear, this wasn't just a matter of opinion. The source points to the actual data reported at the time by the New York Times. We're talking falling murder rates, rising wages, record high energy production, all signs that pointed to a very robust economy being inherited. Okay, so from what's happening at home, the analysis pivots to the entire world stage. The source argues that this same mindset of unrestrained power is being applied to foreign policy, challenging the global order we've known for decades. The source lays out what it sees as a clear pattern of escalation. It starts with what it calls an illegal attack on Venezuela, then moves to threats against other neighbors, and then it culminates in something really unusual: direct threats against Denmark, a founding NATO ally, over Greenland. And just to show how serious this got, the source pulls this quote from the Prime Minister of Denmark. I mean, this isn't your typical diplomatic chatter. This is a public plea from a close historical ally asking the U.S. to please stop making threats. So, this all leads to the final and maybe most important question: what's the endgame here? According to the source, who actually wins when you tear up the rulebook like this, and what are the consequences for everyone else? And this is where the source claims the real motivation snaps into focus. In Venezuela, it argues, the public reason for getting involved seemed to shift. It was no longer about high-minded ideals like democracy. It became very directly about one thing: getting control of the country's oil. And we are not talking about a small amount. The source puts a massive number on the table, a target of somewhere between 30 and 50 million barrels of high-quality Venezuelan oil. And right here, the source presents what it sees as the final piece of the puzzle. This is a social media post attributed to President Trump. It's laid out as a direct announcement that this oil would be turned over to the United States, and that he would personally control the money. So after connecting all of those dots, from questioning elections to seizing resources abroad, this source text leaves us with this one huge, lingering question. It forces you to think, if the rules and the laws are just seen as roadblocks to get around, then what exactly comes next?